Hey, welcome back. Today we're going to be talking about space planning, mostly because I think it's helpful to have a definition because you may have heard of it, but you may not like understand what it is and how it's important and could help you in your space. Um, Random, but my hair smells really good right now. I just put in a dry shampoo that I hadn't tried before a few minutes ago, and I'm like very pleasantly surprised. For those of you who've ever used dry shampoo, I've had like mixed experiences with it. I've found some that are really good and a few that are like disappointing. This one's really good. Anyway, hi, welcome back. And let's dive into space planning. And a little bit about me. I am here. If you're new to this channel, I have a background in personal development, workplace experience, real estate, and interior design. Over 10 years of experience in each of those categories. So um, I'm here to share with you design tips that could help you in your small business, especially if you're a wellness entrepreneur, coach, or someone like that. Or even if you just want to get random tips about stuff you can do for your small business or your home. If that's you, then you're in the right place. So let's dive in. It would help if I opened this, wouldn't it? Okay. I also encourage you to have a yummy beverage handy or glass of water. I think this presentation is probably going to be around half an hour. They usually are about that long. So it's nice to stay hydrated while we're all here. Okay. Okay. So let's talk about space planning. It is both a whole job, a whole role, and yes, I just rhymed. Um, it is also something people do. There's certain elements of space planning that people understand are part of what they do as the process of the design that they're approaching. Um, and yeah, it's a way of approaching projects or efforts, etc. Um, and I'm just realizing I need to add something to this presentation, so I'll circle that back in. Okay, so let's dive into a sample space plan. Some people might call this a space plan. Some people might call it a floor plan. Some people might call it, excuse me, a blueprint. That's kind of an old-fashioned term, but some people still use it, and that's fine. I work with all kinds of definitions in the field that I've been in, so I'm flexible on that. This is a floor plan. And when you understand how interior design projects work, um, this is often one type of plan, but there's many different types of plans. So there's often a demolition plan, and then there's a partition plan, which just shows like walls and built-ins and stuff like that. And then there's something often called a furniture plan. It includes things that are not fixed, but take up room in a space and may require utility connections and stuff. So there's many different types of plans. There's also lighting plans, reflected ceiling plans that show things like your lighting and your ventilation and those kinds of things as well. And we work with all kinds of things like that in the interior design field and also in space planning, depending on how the role lines up. I worked in space planning roles where I did mostly occupancy planning, which had to do with like Excel sheets and how many people are in this building and this floor and this. And then I've also done roles where it was more interior design focused or workplace strategy, organizational psychology. It can really depend on the context and the role. So this is a straightforward floor plan for you. If you were to define it more specifically, some would call it a furniture plan, because as you can see, we have massage room with a massage bed, we have a facial room. The massage bed, it's unlikely that that is fixed, right? It's probably movable or adjustable, at least within a certain parameter. And so those things would indicate something that is a furniture plan. And one thing I want to share with you too, because it helps to kind of visualize, floor plans are often effectively a cross section. It's like as if you were to take a snapshot of, I think it's like 4 or 5 feet high, usually within a space. What do you have if you were doing a cross section looking down into that space from like a bird's eye of 4 or 5 feet high, right? So oftentimes, if there's something maybe higher than this you want to make a note of, but it does count as like a furniture item, you might dash it in with some notes. So random thing that you might want to know. It's kind of interesting. So general factors to consider. We look at space planning. It could include any of the following. What are the requirements for your space, your program, your people, activities, rooms, spaces, the types, the number of, etc. Adjacencies, like what do you definitely want next to something, what do you not care about, and what do you definitely not want next to something, right? For example, if you were, building a public building or something of that effect, you wouldn't want to place a room where people are having confidential conversations right next to like a big hallway. And in fact, you'd have to, there's all sorts of requirements that go into that as far as how you, as far as how you plan the space and how you make sure the acoustics comply with confidentiality concerns, right? So sometimes these are like absolutely not. Sometimes these are big preferences, right? Yes or no. And sometimes they are legally, required. So it can range the spectrum. And yeah, that goes for public buildings, that goes for businesses, that goes for homes, residential, whatever. It runs the gamut, really. And so, for example, complete opposite end of that, right? Residential, you may say, well, I would love to not have my bathroom, or sorry, not my bathroom, my bedroom, like where the mudroom is, right? You don't want to like just walk directly from the outside into a sleeping space. That's so disruptive, right? Especially if you are in kind of a more urban landscape, something like that might feel a little different. If you're in more of a countryscape, but still probably a bit of a challenge depending on where things are located. So, yeah, there's all kinds of adjacency concerns and such. Flexibility, yeah. So for flexibility, you might have a space that is being used as a big gathering space one day and is going to be split into several conference rooms the next. So you might have flexibility of use. If you are talking about retreat spaces, absolutely, you might have different groups coming in, right? You might have all different kinds of uses. Sound bowl here, yoga class here. Maybe someone's renting it out to do a workshop here. Maybe someone's renting out a space to do some spa therapy activities here. So yeah, flexibility does often matter, and it often defines how you can use or not use a space. Circulation, that is both for comfort and also sometimes code, meaning like safety guidelines and laws as they pertain to design. So for circulation, you want to have clear paths. You want to be able to see and anticipate where you're going. Sometimes that often includes signage and certainly visual indicators as well. Safety, we'll talk about egress for fire, codes, ventilation, materials, accessibility. These are all the things that a space needs to have, usually via code, and often also via guidelines, right? So for ventilation, you might have a code for how you need to operate your ventilation in a building, and then you also might have a little bit of flexibility as far as like how warm you want to keep the space, between like a few degrees, right? And that can be essential. And anyone who's ever been in a building situation where it's too hot or too cold and wishing you could change things can relate, I'm sure. And that's going to apply obviously differently to commercial versus residential. When you get residential, you have usually a lot less code requirements depending on what type of residential that is, right? Multifamily residential is different than single family. It's very different. But if you're doing single family, then your codes are often a lot less, but they still exist. They still exist. And they have to be taken into consideration anytime you're building anything. This is why we get permits. This is why we have to go through that legal process anytime we build anything here in the States. It's for your safety. And that has to do with electrical, it has to do with how we build staircases and those kinds of things. So yeah, it's safety is a big factor as well. And again, depending on how space planning is defined within the context in which it exists, it could include any or all of these types of things. We also have zones, like I started talking about before, public versus private, right? That could be security, right? Excuse me. So for example, you might have layers of security in a building if it's, again, kind of a public building with various different government buildings are, often compartmentalized like that. Noisy versus quiet zones, wet versus dry zones as well. And that will help you conceptualize your design. Space standards, required dimensions, recommended dimensions, clearances for, for space, i.e. maybe you want to have like a minimum of 30 inches between your bed and the wall when designing usually, or, sometimes 3 feet, depending on, it might be, you need to have some sort of aisleway. Depends on the scenario that you're placing yourself in. Government codes, which we have to follow, that's, your local, your county, and your federal codes, room sizes that you need for your program, and density. Density is, dictated actually, depending on, again, if you're working on commercial, public type of design, your density is going to be defined by fire codes. It's going to differ if you're working in a different context, right? So something for you to consider, depending on what kind of space you're looking to design, whether that's commercial, residential, small business, etc. Lighting, talking a lot about lighting. I'm going to continue to talk a lot about lighting because it can make or break your space. Natural daylight matters, glare versus shade, and biophilia as well. It kind of can fit into this category, but doesn't, it can kind of be its own. I kind of want to put it in its own category because biophilia matters so much on its own. To be able to have access it into a space can just make a huge difference in how you perceive the world. So if you don't have anything biophilic in your space, I would encourage you to take a look at how you could implement it because it's good for your health as well as just being a beautiful implement. Acoustics, that can mean insulation. And as I mentioned previously, when we are designing for confidentiality, whether that might be in a hospital setting or a government setting, insulation is actually defined by specific requirements that are brought down by the government to be able to protect information, sensitive information. Dampening and buffering of noise. So that's more like if you're, let's say you're in an open office setting and you want like a quieter zone and an open space, there might be implements like panels or implements that hang from the ceiling that buffer sound, those kinds of things. You might have an application under your carpet. There's a number of different ways to dampen sound. It's certainly soft furniture also does it, which is great. That can help, and those kinds of implements. Other factors, aesthetic. I put it towards the end because it's the thing people often put up front. But I wanted to give you some other things to consider before I mention this. Because yes, aesthetics obviously matter. You want to love your space. But also there's all these other functional things, right, that we just looked at that also matter quite a bit. So yeah, aesthetic matters, brand, if you're, again, small business, mood, materials, color, textures, layout, harmony, flow, function, these all define a space, how it feels, how it looks, and how it harmonizes. Understanding of the built environment. So space planning often requires an understanding of the built environment, right? Maybe it requires a little bit of an understanding of plumbing. So for example, in space planning, we always plan for around a foot. I'm not gonna say always, but like usually we plan for around a foot of wall space behind a toilet or a shower or those kinds of things, because of the plumbing that has to go into the wall. Always, usually always for the toilet space behind the toilet, we plan for a foot, and that's because of the plumbing. So that's an example, right? That takes up some of your floor front, and so that's something we have to understand as part of space planning. Also, understanding ventilation, the type of HVAC might do something to your ceiling. It might do something to your ceiling height in a design, which is important to definitely know as you're designing as a space planner or as a designer, or even in your own home, or if you're working with a designer as well. Those are the types of things you definitely want to know. Existing conditions, right? And sometimes we don't know, right, the whole story of what we're going to find in a building when we do construction. I like to say usually we have a good idea, but when it comes to like historical properties or properties where maybe we're working with existing floor prints that are not 100% accurate, we might find surprising things when we go to demo a space that we were not expecting. And sometimes those things are a win, and sometimes those things can fuck shit up. So that's important to know. I'm trying to think of some good examples of wins versus losses in that category. A win that I see all the time that I just love is when people are going to renovate like old historical buildings and they start to peel up like carpet or certain type of tile, or sorry, like a flooring type, maybe it's vinyl or something, and they peel it up and they find like the most gorgeous historical tile and they restore it. Like, oh, just like my little designer heart gets all flutter. That's a major design win usually for people. Not a win is like if there's maybe something in the way when you go to demo. It's like, oh man, like this thing is here that I wasn't expecting, and now I have to change my whole layout or my design because we're expecting a column here or this over here. I'll say, I feel like one of the things we often see in residential design is like people wanting to do something with a space, open it up, and then realize the wall is like a load bearing, or there's some blockage that they can't get around, or is difficult to get around. Like you'd have to spend a lot of money to fix, kind of thing. So that kind of stuff can happen. And so understanding the built environment is really, really important. And also I would say having a flexibility around the built environment too, because oftentimes we find stuff we're not expecting and then we just have to kind of deal with it. So that's important. One thing that isn't on this list that I want to note is actually, if you're working in corporate space planning and interior design, and this has definitely been true for me because I have a lot of experience with this, change management, organizational psychology and development, and workplace strategy, 3 really big things someone's going to do when they're space planning in a corporate environment. Occupancy planning, because we're not just talking about moving around a couple of spaces or a few people. We're talking oftentimes about moving, we might be talking about moving big labs or big equipment or 50 people, or we're growing and we need more space, or we need to build within the space floor plan we have, that kind of thing. So it can be, it can really run the gamut. So that's not going to probably apply to you watching this video. It might if you're watching this video. I'm assuming if you found me and you're watching this, you're probably looking for some residential tips or maybe small business, wellness, entrepreneurial type of thing. But some of these, there's some overlap. So some of them may apply to you and some of them may not. Because if you're designing in a commercial space, you have to follow code very differently than if you're designing in a residential type of space. So if you're looking to redesign your home office, you're going to have a completely different set of code requirements and considerations in general than you would if you, for example, have an office in a commercial building. Or if you have a spa environment or a wellness type of space in a commercial environment, you're going to have a different set of considerations and codes too. So those are all important things to kind of file away. Okay, so in short, space planners balance functional needs, human comfort, building systems, and code requirements while creating a flow that feels intuitive, safe, and aligned with the client's vision. So that is often what we do. But again, it could include any or all of the things that I mentioned. It really depends on the context. And then if we're looking at space planning in particular types of space, it often it'll depend on the context, right? So space planning in a house is going to look totally different than space planning in a 2 million square foot commercial building. Lots of overlap with interior designers. In fact, sometimes depending on the context, roles can be very similar or exactly the same. So just a little tidbit on that in case you're wondering. Why space planning matters in your space. So we're going to talk about why it matters for residential, why it matters for retreat healing, why it matters for small offices, and why it matters for small businesses. So for residential, space planning ensures comfort and flow. Rooms are the right size, furniture fits, circulation feels natural, and makes daily living easier, more beautiful, and more functional. So it's just practical. Retreat healing spaces, good planning supports nervous system safety and relaxation. Zoning quiet from active areas, buffering noise, and creating natural transition so clients move from arrival to treatment to rest without stress. Space planning maximizes, for small offices, space planning maximizes efficiency and productivity, clear circulation, well-placed work zones, and meeting spaces that support both focus and collaboration. For small businesses, plan shapes the customer experience, how people enter, flow through, interact with products and services, and feel in the space. It also ensures back of house functions like storage, staff, and utilities don't disrupt the front experience. So remember what I said earlier about noisy versus quiet? Like, this is why we have to think in depth about adjacencies and those kinds of things. You also want to maximize your lighting. So for example, you don't need some like gorgeous natural lighting in like a storage space. You know, why would you waste that beautiful view on something that is back of house, right? All right, so let's wrap it up. A little bit less of a visual presentation, but more of a, like, let's understand definitions. Let's understand why, you know, how much goes into this, why it's important. And, you know, usually I focus on solopreneurs, wellnesspreneurs, but I wanted to focus on the gamut today. And the reason is I want you to understand how like this can really shift depending on what kind of space you're in. And if you're watching this, you could be running part of your business in your home. You could be running it from a larger commercial space. You could be running it from a smaller commercial. You could be running it in a few different types of places. So rather than over focus and make an assumption about how or where you're working, I kind of wanted to open it up. So I understand that some of these may not apply to you, but also some of them do. So it's kind of important to understand what does and what you might like run into as well. Like if you are transitioning from working out of your house to working out of a commercial building, those are definitely things you're going to want to know, like, oh, I'm going to have to deal with some different code stuff here. Like I'm going to need to hire someone here. I'm going to need to work with contractors, and the permits process is probably going to be different. Like there's things to definitely just keep in mind so that you can plan and set yourself up for success, and hopefully like a lot less stress than if you hadn't planned. So okay, so then let's wrap up with this quote. and this is about homes. A house is much more than a mere shelter. It should lift us emotionally and spiritually. John Saladino. He's an architect and designer. So I would argue that a lot of this quote actually applies to homes, but it also applies to commercial spaces as well. Our building scapes are much more than mere shelters. They should lift us emotionally and mentally, and sometimes, in the context, spiritually as well. Right? It's enough to have a shelter, but we want to be inspired and elevated within our space. And that's what we do. That's a big part of what we do when we're space planning or we're designing, we're considering the context, and we're planning smartly for successful outcomes in our environment. So I want to leave you with that. Okay. By the way, if you're curious about what I'm drinking, it's not chamomile tea. I don't know if any of you watching have any allergies, but I found something out actually a few weeks ago because I was looking to tweak a few things in my eating habits, and I was like, oh, I want to include more chamomile tea. But I looked it up, and apparently, if you have, I think it's an allergy to ragweed. I think it's an allergy to ragweed. Chamomile might be like not the best thing. So I was like, wow, I did not know that. And I have an allergy to a few different things, including ragweed. So I actually, instead of drinking chamomile tea, I'm drinking linden tea, which obviously it doesn't have the same exact impacts, but I think it has some overlapping similarities, which is great. I love this. This is linden tea, and I like it a lot. I'll actually I'll look up the benefits and pop them in the YouTube here so you can see for yourself. I'm just realizing now that I got a bit of a sunburn today. I must have forgotten to apply enough sunscreen when I went out for my walk. Oh well. Oh well. Can't win them all. Anyway, all right, let's wrap up for today. Thank you so much for joining me on this short discussion about space planning. I hope it was helpful. I hope it helped you kind of see some of the intricacies with which we work, and also some of the context with which we work, why it's so important to consider this when you're approaching any of your design projects, and just an overall summary and clarification of like what that is. So, all right, well, let me know if you have any questions. I'm happy to answer. Also, again, let me know if you have any requests for feedback. I'm happy to take a look and see if that's something I can answer for you. And see you next time. Thanks.